The laughter was louder than it needed to be. It filled the Cornerstone bar and grill like smoke, curling around the dim amber lights and polished leather booths. At the back corner, a cluster of men in sharp suits leaned close over their whiskeys, their watches catching the glow like trophies. Their voices carried, careless and cutting, each word sharpened by the comfort of being among their own. At the far end of the bar sat Nathan Reed, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the flannel shirt faded at the shoulders, his jeans marked with the grease of a long day beneath a car hood. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't need to. His glass rested in his hand, ice shifting softly in the amber liquid as though it knew the weight of silence. The jokes started the way they always did. One voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Bet he's just here for the cheap fries. Another laughed, shaking his glass so the cubes chimed against the rim. Looks like he came straight from fixing the dishwasher. A third leaned back, smirking. Single dads don't build empires, they just clean up after the ones who do. Nathan didn't move. His jaw didn't tighten. His shoulders stayed square, calm in the storm of mockery. There was no weakness in his silence. It was the kind of stillness forged under pressure, like steel waiting in the heat of a forge. The world saw flannel and work boots, grease-stained hands, and assumed the story ended there. But Nathan had lived too many nights balancing bills by a dim kitchen light, too many mornings waking at 5:30 to pack a lunch with a note that said, "You got this, Emma." He had no need to explain himself to men who measured worth in cufflinks. Across the bar, someone else was watching. Olivia Harrington, CEO of Harrington and Grant Real Estate, a woman whose name carried weight across Portland's skyline, sat with a quiet glass of wine. Known in boardrooms for her precision, her certainty, she didn't laugh this time. She saw what the others missed. Not a punchline, not a man out of place, but a steady presence in a room built on noise. Nathan lifted his glass and took a slow sip, his eyes never rising to meet the suits at the back. His calm unsettled them more than anger ever could. Olivia's gaze lingered. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. In a world where voices grew loud to prove their worth, here was a man who carried his without saying a word. Tomorrow night she would come back, not for the wine, not for the company in the corner booth, but to sit beside the man they tried to laugh away. Because sometimes strength doesn't enter the room with a spotlight. Sometimes it's the quiet figure at the edge of the bar holding steady while the world mistakes silence for weakness. Before the careless laughter, in the sting of being underestimated, Nathan Reed's world was quieter, not silent, not empty, just steady in its rhythm. On Maple Street, tucked inside a modest two-bedroom house with peeling paint on the shutters and a swing that squeaked when the wind pushed it, life began at 5:30 a.m. sharp. The alarm clock buzzed its tired rattle, and Nathan's feet hit the floor before the second ring. He didn't believe in snooze buttons. Life had never offered him second chances so freely, so he met the morning with purpose. Coffee came first, black and hot. No sugar, no cream. Then the small rituals that stitched his days together. Packing Emma's lunch with the precision of an architect sketching lines on paper. Apple slices wrapped tight. A sandwich cut into triangles because she insisted it tasted better that way. Inside the lid of her lunchbox, his handwriting and permanent marker still waited. "You got this, kiddo." He had written it the week her mother walked out, when Emma was too small to understand what leaving meant. Emma had added a unicorn sticker beside his words, and neither had peeled it off since. In another life, one that sometimes felt like a fading photograph, Nathan Reed had been Nathan Reed, M-Arch, MIT graduate, rising star at Coleman and Fisher architectural firm. He had drafted blueprints until midnight, shaping Portland's skyline with innovative, sustainable designs that earned industry recognition. His name appeared in architectural journals. His future stretched upward like the steel beams of his creations. But dreams bend when life does. When Sarah left, claiming she never signed up to be a mom, the house turned cold, and diapers didn't change themselves. The 2 a.m. feedings, doctor appointments, and daycare didn't care about blueprint deadlines. Nathan made his choice without hesitation. Emma came first. Always. He traded drafting tables for engine bays, precision pencils for socket wrenches. His colleague Frank, whose '67 Mustang Nathan had helped restore on weekends, offered him a position at Reed's Auto. The sign had faded from too many summers. The waiting room carried the smell of old tires and burnt coffee, but every bolt Nathan tightened bore his mark: integrity. He never complained because what mattered most was Emma. She needed someone to clap the loudest when she sang off-key at school recitals, someone to sit at parent-teacher conferences, someone who made bedtime stories a ritual instead of a luxury. Nathan built a different kind of life, small but solid. Oil changes, grocery lists, dinner at 6:30, bedtime by 8. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable. And for Emma, dependable was everything. Neighbors saw the flannel, the grease beneath his nails, the calloused hands that came from years of work. They saw a single dad and assumed the story ended there. But Nathan carried more than appearances. He carried the weight of responsibility, the quiet strength of a man who had rebuilt not just cars, but an entire life from the ground up. When the water heater broke, he fixed it. When Emma cried because she wasn't invited to a birthday party, he made pancakes with extra chocolate chips and let her choose the movie. On holidays when the house felt too empty, he hung the stockings anyway. Nathan was the kind of man who returned grocery carts to their place, who stopped to help strangers with flat tires, who remembered birthdays when no one else did. The kind of man often overlooked in rooms filled with louder voices and shinier shoes. Yet he found peace in that rhythm, the quiet hum of work, the laughter of his daughter at the dinner table, the comfort of knowing that while the world spun faster and flashier around him, his little corner of Maple Street held steady. What no one at the Cornerstone knew, what no one in Portland knew except for Emma, who sometimes caught him late at night, was that after Emma went to sleep, Nathan opened his laptop. Under the username Foundations First, he contributed detailed analyses of new construction projects to Architecture Now, an industry forum. His posts, anonymous but respected, dissected everything from load-bearing calculations to environmental impact assessments. The architectural community had no idea that some of their most insightful structural critiques came from a mechanic's grease-stained hands. Nathan never sought credit. He simply couldn't let go of the part of himself that saw the world in blueprints and stress calculations. It was like breathing, necessary, instinctual, life-sustaining. In a world that increasingly valued noise over substance, Nathan Reed had built a life around the opposite principle. He measured his worth not in likes or validation from people who didn't know him, but in things that rarely made headlines. A working water heater on a freezing night, a roof patched before the rains came, a daughter who fell asleep knowing her father would always be there when she woke. There was no applause when he fixed the leaking faucet in the kitchen, no audience when he carried groceries in after a long shift or folded laundry, while Emma practiced her spelling words at the table. He lived in the quiet spaces, the unseen, uncelebrated corners of everyday life. And for Nathan, that was enough. Yet sometimes in the late hours when Emma was asleep and the house settled into its midnight creaks, he would stand at his drafting table, the one piece of his old life he couldn't bear to part with, and sketch. Buildings that would never be built. Spaces designed to work with nature rather than against it. Ideas that once would have transformed skylines now lived only in the pages of sketchbooks tucked away in his closet. It wasn't regret that drove his pencil across the paper. It was something deeper, more essential. The need to create, to solve problems, to bring order to chaos. The same impulse that made him rebuild a transmission could make him redesign a foundation. Different tools, same principle. Find what's broken, understand why it failed, make it stronger. In a world where everyone shouts to prove their worth, sometimes real strength lies in silence. This was the thought that carried him through early mornings at the garage, through endless parent-teacher conferences, through nights when the emptiness of the house pressed in like physical weight. He'd whispered it to Emma once when she came home crying because the other kids had made fun of her secondhand clothes. She'd written it in her journal, a child trying to make sense of a world that often valued the wrong things. It was more than a platitude. It was how he'd rebuilt his life, quietly, steadily, with a strength few recognized but everyone who truly knew him respected. 15 miles across town, in a sleek downtown high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River, Olivia Merrington stood alone, Her corner office at Harrington and Grant Real Estate Development gleamed with awards and accolades. Modern art hung on walls painted the exact shade of dove gray she'd specified. Nothing was accidental here. Nothing was unplanned. At 42, Olivia had climbed to heights few women in Portland's real estate development world had reached. She'd fought for every inch, every project, every ounce of respect. The company she'd built with Victor Grant over the past decade had transformed abandoned warehouses into luxury apartments, vacant lots into community spaces. Their signature was everywhere in the city's renaissance. But tonight, staring out at the city lights, Olivia felt the weight of it all pressing down. The morning's board meeting had been brutal. Victor's push to accelerate the Riverview project, despite preliminary environmental concerns, had put her in an impossible position. She'd built her reputation on ethical development, on doing things right. But Victor had connections, investors, and an impatience that often translated to profit. "We can't all afford principles as expensive as yours, Liv," he'd said, smiling that shark smile that always preceded getting his way. She took a sip of water, wishing it were something stronger. Her phone buzzed with another email, the third designer backing out of the bid for the East Side project. The whispers were spreading. Women in this industry didn't last. They were too cautious, too emotional, too principled. The fact that she'd outperformed most of her male counterparts for a decade didn't seem to matter anymore. Olivia gathered her things. The office would still be here tomorrow with all its problems. Tonight she needed space to breathe, somewhere away from the polished veneer and practiced smiles. Somewhere real. That's how she'd ended up at the Cornerstone last night. A place Victor would never set foot in. A place where no one knew or cared who Olivia Harrington was. And that's where she'd seen him. The man in flannel, unmoved by mockery, steady as the foundations she insisted on for every building that bore her company's name. She hadn't planned to return tonight, but something about his stillness, his certainty, had lingered in her mind all day. In a world where everyone she knew performed their importance, here was someone who seemed to have nothing to prove. The glossy marble of the lobby floor reflected her heels as she walked toward the elevator. Jenkins, the night security guard, nodded with the familiarity of seeing her leave late too many nights. "Another long one, Miss Harrington?" "Seems that way, Jenkins." She offered a tired smile. "How's your daughter doing at college?" His face brightened. "Made Dean's List her first semester. First in our family to even go to college, and there she is." "That's wonderful." The pride in his voice reminded her of her own father, who'd hung every one of her achievement certificates in his small construction office, bragging to clients about his daughter, the architect, before she'd even finished her degree. The memory followed her into the elevator, where she caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. Her tailored suit, her carefully styled hair, the subtle makeup that took 30 minutes each morning to look natural. Armor, all of it. Necessary in her world, but heavy. Sometimes she wondered if the young woman who'd spent summers helping her father frame houses was still in there somewhere beneath the designer labels and boardrooms strategies. Outside, the crisp September air carried the first hints of fall. Portland's early evening traffic hummed along the streets, headlights blurring in the light mists that had started to fall. Olivia bypassed her BMW in the parking garage and decided to walk. 20 minutes later, she pushed open the door to the Cornerstone Bar and Grill. The place was busier tonight, a Thursday crowd filling most of the tables. Classic rock played from speakers mounted in the corners, just loud enough to fill the spaces between conversations. She scanned the room, feeling a strange mixture of disappointment and relief when she didn't immediately see him. Then she spotted him at the same stool at the end of the bar, his back to the door, those same broad shoulders under a different flannel shirt. This one, dark blue, worn at the elbows. Something in her chest loosened, a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. Olivia made her way to the bar, aware of the glances that followed her. She was out of place here in her designer suit, like a falcon among sparrows. But the discomfort felt necessary somehow, a reminder that there were worlds outside the one she'd built for herself. She took the empty stool beside him. "Is this seat taken?" Nathan looked up, mild surprise crossing his features before settling back into that calm. "It's all yours." Olivia slid onto the stool, ordered a glass of wine, and then, to her own surprise, found herself without her usual carefully prepared small talk. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just waiting. Finally, Nathan spoke. "Didn't expect to see you back here." "I didn't expect to come back," Olivia admitted, "but sometimes you find yourself returning to places that feel honest." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The cornerstone isn't much, but what you see is what you get." "That's rare," she said, and meant it. The conversation that followed surprised her with its ease. They didn't talk about real estate empires or car repairs. They talked about how coffee should always be black unless you are trying to soften a morning after no sleep. About how a grilled cheese sandwich tastes better when cut into triangles instead of rectangles. About the sound tires make on gravel roads in the fall, a sound that somehow belongs to memory more than to the present. Nathan didn't try to impress her, didn't seem aware of the impression he made. He just talked, listened, and laughed once in a while at the kind of details most people rush past. Around them, the bar hummed with chatter, with clinking glasses and scattered laughter. But at that stretched civic counter, something shifted. "I'm Olivia, by the way," she said, realizing they hadn't even exchanged names. "Nathan Reed," he replied, offering a hand that was strong, calloused, and somehow more genuine than any business handshake she'd received in years. The night deepened around them. Olivia found herself talking about growing up in Seattle with a father who built houses and a mother who designed their interiors. How they'd taught her that spaces shape people as much as people shape spaces. Nathan listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly hearing her, not just waiting for his turn to speak. When she mentioned the new Waterton building downtown, something changed in his expression. A slight sharpening of focus, a flicker of professional assessment that seemed at odds with his flannel shirt and work boots. "That's the one with the curved glass facade, right?" he asked. "Impressive looking, but I wonder about the thermal efficiency. All that western exposure with minimal overhang must be like an oven by 3 p.m. Olivia stared at him, caught off guard by the unexpected technical critique. "That's exactly right. They've had to retrofit additional cooling systems already." "How did you know that?" Nathan shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "Just an observation. I notice buildings. Most people notice if they're pretty. You noticed a specific design flaw in the thermal management system." He smiled slightly, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "I used to work construction," he offered, and she knew immediately it wasn't the whole truth. There was knowledge there beyond what you'd pick up on a job site, the kind that came from education, from understanding systems and designs from the inside out. Construction workers don't typically discuss thermal efficiency using architectural terminology, she pressed gently. Something flickered across his face, not defensiveness, but a quiet assessment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "I've picked up a few things along the way." Olivia recognized the deflection but didn't push further. Everyone had their stories, their reasons for the paths they'd chosen. She respected the privacy of his. "Well, your observations are more accurate than those of most architects I work with," she said instead. "The Waterton is what happens when aesthetics overrule functionality." Beautiful disaster. "Form follows function," Nathan said, the phrase coming automatically, the mantra of architectural programs everywhere. Olivia tilted her head slightly. "Exactly." The moment hung between them, a recognition of shared understanding that went beyond casual conversation. But before she could follow that thread, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression softened immediately. "My daughter," he explained. "Babysitter says she can't sleep. I should head home." Olivia nodded, surprised by her own disappointment. Of course, Nathan left enough cash to cover both their drinks, waving off her protest. "Maybe I'll see you around," he said. And it wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't dismissal either. "I'd like that," Olivia replied, and found that she meant it more than she'd expected to. As she watched him leave, straight-backed and unhurried, she realized something that had been tugging at her awareness all evening. In Nathan Reed, she'd recognized something increasingly rare in her world: authenticity. A man who knew exactly who he was and felt no need to convince anyone else. In the quiet of the cornerstone, something had begun that neither of them had anticipated. Not romance, not yet, but connection. The kind that happens when two people recognize in each other something the rest of the world has missed. And as Olivia finished her wine, she knew with certainty that she would return tomorrow. Because in a life filled with calculated risks and strategic relationships, this unplanned encounter felt like the most honest thing that had happened to her in years. Nathan's pickup truck rumbled through the quiet streets of Portland, its headlights cutting through the light evening fog. The radio played softly, some classic rock station that kept him company on late drives. As he turned onto Maple Street, his thoughts lingered on the woman at the bar, Olivia. There had been something unexpected about her, not just her obvious success or the way she carried herself, but the genuine interest in her questions, the way she actually listened to his answers. It had been a long time since someone had really listened to him. The porch light was on at 1843 Maple Street, the modest two-bedroom craftsman that had been home for the past 8 years. As he pulled into the driveway, he could see Miss Henderson, his elderly neighbor who watched Emma when he worked late, peeking through the curtains. The engine had barely stopped before she opened the front door, wrapped in her usual cardigan despite the mild September evening. "She's still awake," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice gentle with the understanding that came from having raised 4 children of her own. "Said she needed to talk to you about something important. School project, I think." Nathan thanked her, walked her home as he always did, then returned to find Emma sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by paper, colored pencils, and what appeared to be the beginnings of a model built from cardboard and popsicle sticks. "Hey, Squirt," he said, hanging his jacket by the door. "Little late for architecture, isn't it?" Emma looked up, her dark hair falling across her face in a way that reminded him painfully of Sarah. But everything else, the determined set of her jaw, the focus in her eyes, that was all his. "It's for science class," she explained, moving papers to make room for him to sit beside her. "We're studying ecosystems and sustainable environments. I'm designing a building that works with nature instead of against it." Nathan sat down, careful not to disturb her meticulous arrangement. At 10 years old, Emma already showed the same precision, the same attention to detail that had once defined his professional life. "Tell me about it," he said, and settled in to listen. For the next 20 minutes, he watched his daughter explain how her building would collect rainwater, use natural light, and provide habitats for native birds on its green roof. Her small hands moved with certainty as she pointed out features on her drawing, explaining concepts like passive cooling and solar orientation, with a vocabulary that made his heart swell with pride and an ache he couldn't quite name. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked when she finally paused for breath. Emma gave him a look that only preteens can perfect. Part exasperation, part affection. "From you, Dad. I've seen your books, and sometimes I watch when you're on those architecture websites at night." Nathan felt something shift in his chest. He'd thought those late nights were his secret, his small connection to the life he'd left behind. He hadn't realized Emma had been watching, learning, absorbing. "You're not mad, are you?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know those sites are probably boring for most kids." He pulled her into a hug, careful not to knock over her cardboard creation. "Not mad at all, Squirt. Just surprised and impressed." He looked at her model again, seeing it with new eyes. "You know what? I think we can make this even better. Let me show you something about load distribution." They worked together until Emma's eyes began to droop, her excitement finally giving way to the late hour. As he tucked her into bed, Nathan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the pure joy of sharing his passion, of seeing it reflected and transformed through his daughter's imagination. "Dad?" Emma's voice was sleepy now, barely above a whisper. "The kids at school say you're just a mechanic, but you're not, are you? You're something else, too." Nathan smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "I'm your dad first," he said. "Everything else comes second." She nodded, satisfied with this answer, and drifted off to sleep. Later, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, Nathan found himself on architecture, now again. But instead of his usual analysis of structural weaknesses or material choices, he was looking at educational programs, sustainability courses at Portland Community College, weekend workshops on green building techniques, things Emma might enjoy, things they could do together. In a world that had tried to put him in a box labeled mechanic or single dad, he was beginning to see the possibility of something more complex, more complete. Not a return to his old life. That door had closed years ago when he chose Emma over career ambition. But perhaps a new door, one that integrated all the parts of himself. The father, the mechanic, the architect who still lived in his mind. And somehow, strangely, the thought of Olivia Harrington entered this contemplation. A woman who had seen something in him beyond the flannel shirt and work boots. A woman who noticed thermal efficiency issues in glass facades. As the clock ticked past midnight, Nathan closed his laptop and headed to bed. Tomorrow would begin as it always did. 5:30 alarm, black coffee, lunch packed with a note. But something had shifted in the foundations of his carefully constructed life. A recognition, perhaps, that silence doesn't have to mean surrender. That the blueprints of a life, like those of a building, can be revised without compromising structural integrity. In a world where voices grew loud to prove their worth, he had chosen the strength of silence. But maybe, just maybe, there was also strength in being heard. The next morning at Reed's Auto, the familiar rhythm of the shop wrapped around Nathan like a well-worn glove. The metallic ring of wrenches against engine blocks, the hiss of the pneumatic lift, the classic rock station playing from the battered radio in the corner. These sounds had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat over the past 7 years. Frank Donovan, the 65-year-old owner who'd taken Nathan on when he needed a job more than he needed pride, was bent over the open hood of a 1972 Chevelle, his weathered hands working with a precision that came from 50 years of fixing what others couldn't. "She's running rough on startup," Frank said without looking up as Nathan approached. "Timing's off, but there's something else. Can't quite place it." Nathan leaned in, his trained eyes scanning the engine bay. "Vacuum leak," he said after a moment. "Look at the wear pattern on the intake manifold gasket." Frank squinted, then nodded with appreciation. "Damn, you're right. Good catch." This was their dance, had been since the beginning. Frank with his lifetime of mechanical intuition, Nathan with his architect's eye for systems and weaknesses. They made a good team, though neither would ever say it aloud. The morning passed in the familiar rhythm of work. A brake job on a Subaru, an alternator replacement on an old Ford pickup, oil changes and tire rotations, the bread and butter of a small garage. Nathan moved through the tasks with practiced efficiency, his hands knowing what to do while his mind sometimes drifted elsewhere. Today, it kept returning to the cornerstone. To Olivia Harrington and the way she'd leaned forward slightly when he mentioned thermal efficiency in the Waterton building. The way her eyes had sharpened with interest, with recognition. It had been a long time since anyone had seen past the grease-stained hands to the mind behind them. "Earth to Nathan," Frank's voice broke through his thoughts. "You planning on tightening that oil filter this century?" Nathan refocused, realizing he had been staring at the underside of a Honda Civic for longer than necessary. "Sorry, just thinking." "Must be some thought," Frank said, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. "You've been a million miles away all morning." Nathan tightened the filter, then slid out from under the car. "Just some stuff with Emma's school project," he said, the half-truth coming easily. Frank didn't press. That was one of the things Nathan appreciated most about the older man. He respected boundaries. Maybe because he had his own, walls built over a lifetime that included 2 divorces and a tour in Vietnam that he never discussed. At noon, the shop quieted as the other mechanics headed to the diner across the street. Nathan stayed behind, as he often did, to eat the lunch he'd packed at dawn. He sat at the small desk in the corner of the shop, sandwich in one hand, his phone in the other, scrolling through Architecture Now's forums. A new post caught his eye, a heated debate about the proposed Riverview development. The plans had been published last week, and the architecture community was divided. Some praised the bold design, others criticized the environmental impact. Nathan studied the renderings, his professional eye catching issues the casual observer would miss. The positioning on the riverbank would create drainage problems during Portland's rainy season. The foundation design didn't account for the soil composition in that area. He knew because he'd worked on a similar project in that exact location 8 years ago. The environmental impact assessment seemed suspiciously optimistic about runoff management. Without thinking, he logged in as Foundations First and began typing a detailed analysis of the structural and environmental weaknesses. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, technical terms flowing as naturally as they had in his MIT days. He pointed out the inadequate setback from the riverbank, the potential for soil erosion, the flaws in the drainage system that would lead to flooding within 5 years. Only after he hit post did he notice the developer listed on the project, Harrington and Grant Real Estate Development, Olivia's company. He stared at the screen, a sinking feeling in his stomach. Was this why she'd been at the Cornerstone 2 nights in a row? Was she scouting the local reaction to the project? Had their conversations been some kind of corporate research? The thought settled like a stone, cold and heavy. He'd begun to think she'd seen something in him beyond the flannel and work boots. But maybe all she'd seen was a local to pump for information. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of oil changes and tire rotations. Nathan moved through the familiar tasks mechanically, his mind elsewhere. By 5 o'clock, when he wiped the day's grime from his hands and headed for his truck, he'd almost convinced himself not to return to the Cornerstone that night. Almost. Because beneath the doubt, beneath the suspicion, there was something else. A certainty that what he'd seen in Olivia's eyes when she'd recognized his knowledge of architecture had been genuine. A belief that the ease of their conversation, the way she'd talked about her father's construction business, hadn't been an act. So at 7:30, after dinner with Emma and helping with her math homework, after making sure Mrs. Henderson was comfortable in the living room with her knitting and the TV remote, Nathan found himself once again pulling up to the Cornerstone Bar and Grill. He hesitated in the parking lot, hands still on the steering wheel. Through the windows, he could see the usual Thursday night crowd. No sign of Olivia. Maybe she wouldn't come. Maybe last night had been a one-time curiosity, a CEO slumming in a working-class bar before returning to her real life. But he'd come this far. Might as well have a drink, even if it was alone. The familiar smell of beer and burger grease greeted him as he pushed through the door. He nodded to Tony behind the bar, who already had his usual ready by the time he reached his stool at the far end. The comfort of routine, of being known in this small way, settled some of the unease that had followed him from the garage. He was halfway through his drink, scrolling through Emma's school calendar on his phone, when the door opened and Olivia walked in. The bar's dim lighting caught the copper highlights in her hair, the sharp lines of her tailored blazer. She paused just inside the entrance, scanning the room until her eyes found him. The smile that crossed her face then, small, genuine, almost relieved, settled the last of his doubts. Whatever her reasons for being at the Cornerstone, they weren't corporate espionage. She made her way to him, navigating between tables with the confidence of someone used to commanding rooms. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," she said as she took the stool beside him. "I wasn't sure you would either," he admitted. "Long day," she said, ordering a glass of wine. "The kind that makes you question why you do what you do." Nathan studied her face, the subtle tension around her eyes, the careful way she held her shoulders. "I know something about those." Their conversation started tentatively, as if both were testing the waters after last night's unexpected connection. But soon they settled into the same easy rhythm. Olivia told him about a community garden project her company had helped fund in East Portland. Nathan shared a story about Emma's science teacher calling him in because she'd designed a suspension bridge instead of a volcano for the science fair. "She sounds like quite a kid," Olivia said, genuine warmth in her voice. "She's the best thing I've ever done," Nathan replied simply. "Everything else is just details." Something softened in Olivia's expression. "My father used to say something similar about me. He built houses, but he always said I was his greatest project." "Smart man," Nathan said. "He was," Olivia agreed, a shadow crossing her features. "He passed away 5 years ago. Heart attack on a job site." "I'm sorry," Nathan said, meaning it. She nodded, accepting the simple condolence without the awkwardness that often followed such revelations. "He would have liked you," she said after a moment. "He respected people who were good with their hands, who built things that lasted." The conversation shifted then, moving from personal history to broader topics. Architecture, sustainable design, the changing face of Portland. Nathan found himself speaking more freely than he had in years, his knowledge and passion for design emerging from the place he'd buried them when he'd changed careers. When he mentioned the principles of passive solar heating, Olivia leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "You know," she said, "most mechanics don't discuss architectural theory with that level of understanding." Nathan met her gaze steadily. The moment had come for either more deflection or a small piece of truth. I wasn't always a mechanic. I had a feeling, she said, not pushing, just acknowledging. He took a breath, then let it out slowly. MIT Masters in Architecture. I worked it for Coleman and Fisher for 6 years. Her eyebrows rose slightly, not in judgment, but in genuine surprise. That's a prestigious firm. What happened? The simplest answer was also the truest. Emma happened. Her mother left when she was 2. The hours at Coleman and Fisher weren't compatible with single parenthood. Olivia nodded, understanding in her eyes. So you rebuilt your life around her. I did what any parent would do, Nathan said with a slight shrug. Found work with hours I could manage, something that would keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Not every parent would, Olivia said softly. Not every parent does. The truth of that statement hung between them, acknowledged but not dwelled upon. They both knew too well how many people chose career over family, ambition over responsibility. Can I ask you something? Olivia said after a moment. Nathan nodded. Do you miss it? Architecture, I mean. The question caught him off guard with its directness, its insight. No one had asked him that in years. Most people in his life now had no idea about his previous career, and those who did assumed he'd moved on. Yes, he said finally, the admission feeling like something physical leaving his chest. Not the long hours or the corporate politics, but the work itself, the problem solving, the creativity, the feeling of designing something that will outlast you. Yeah, I miss that. Olivia's expression was thoughtful, free of pity or judgment. Have you ever thought about finding a way back to it? On your own terms? Nathan took a sip of his drink, considering the question. Sometimes, he admitted. But the industry doesn't exactly welcome people who've stepped away. And starting over means time away from Emma, financial uncertainty, risks I'm not sure I can take. I understand, Olivia said, and he believed she did. But for what it's worth, talent like yours doesn't disappear just because you change careers. The architect is still there, under the mechanic's hands. The words touched something deep in Nathan, a recognition he hadn't realized he'd been waiting for. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Henderson. Ma was asking for him, time to head home. As he settled his tab, Olivia reached out, her hand lightly touching his arm. Same time tomorrow? The question held more than a casual invitation for drinks. It held the possibility of something neither of them had expected to find in the Cornerstone Bar and Grill, a connection that bridged their different worlds, that saw beyond surfaces to the complexities beneath. Same time tomorrow, Nathan agreed. As he drove home through Portland's quiet streets, Nathan found himself thinking not about the past he'd left behind, but about possibilities he hadn't considered in years. About how lives, like buildings, sometimes need to be redesigned from the ground up, and about how sometimes the most unlikely foundations can support the most remarkable structures. The following night, Nathan found himself back at the Cornerstone, drawn by a pull he hadn't felt in years. The familiar sounds of clinking glasses and subdued conversation welcomed him as he took his usual seat at the far end of the bar. Tony, the bartender, nodded in greeting and slid his usual drink across the polished wood without being asked. Busy night, Nathan observed, noting the larger-than-usual Thursday crowd. Tony snorted. Some big real estate deal closed today. The suits are celebrating. He nodded toward the back of the bar where a group in expensive business attire had claimed several tables pushed together. Nathan recognized Olivia's copper hair immediately. She sat at the edge of the group, a glass of wine untouched in front of her, nodding occasionally at whatever the man next to her was saying. Even from across the room, Nathan could see the tension in her shoulders, the practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. He turned back to his drink, determined not to stare. If she noticed him, fine. If not, that was fine too. They were from different worlds after all. Last night's connection had been a pleasant anomaly, nothing more. 20 minutes later, a shadow fell across the bar beside him. Nathan looked up, expecting to see Olivia, but instead found himself face to face with a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit. Sharp blue eyes assessed him with the cold calculation of someone evaluating property values, not people. "So you're the mechanic," the man said, his voice carrying the crisp edge of expensive education. He didn't offer his hand. "Victor Grant, Harrington and Grant." Nathan nodded once, neither intimidated nor particularly impressed. Nathan Reed. Victor's mouth twitched into what might have been a smile on someone with actual warmth. Olivia mentioned she'd been slumming it with the locals. He glanced pointedly at Nathan's flannel shirt and work boots. Gathering the common touch for our PR campaign, no doubt. Before Nathan could respond, Olivia appeared at Victor's elbow, her expression a careful mask of professional courtesy. Victor, I see you've met Nathan. Just introducing myself to your research project. Victor swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, ice clinking against the sides like a warning. Though I must say, if you wanted insight into the working class, we could have hired a focus group. Less grease that way. Nathan remained perfectly still, his face betraying nothing. He'd faced worse than an arrogant businessman with too much cologne and too little respect. Olivia's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Nathan and I were just having a conversation, something grown-ups do occasionally without an agenda. Victor chuckled, the sound as genuine as a $3 bill. Always the idealist, Liv. That's why I handle the practical side of our partnership. He turned his attention back to Nathan. So, you fix cars. Must be fulfilling, getting your hands dirty every day. It has its moments, Nathan replied evenly. I imagine so, though I can't recall the last time I changed my own oil. That's what people like you are for, right? Nathan took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze level. You know, he said quietly, sometimes the guy who changes your oil knows more about engines than the one driving the car. Victor's smile tightened a fraction. Cute analogy. But let's be honest, different leagues entirely. I build the future of this city. You maintain what others create. Nathan didn't rise to the bait. He simply leaned forward slightly, his tone quieter but sharp enough to cut through the noise around them. You ever lose a client at 2 in the morning because their brakes failed on the interstate? Victor blinked, thrown off balance. Can't say I have. I have, and I had to look their kid in the eye and explain why the fix came too late. The words hung in the air, heavy, unshakable. The chatter from nearby tables seemed to fade, replaced by the soft hum of the neon light over the bar. Nathan didn't raise his voice, didn't try to impress. He spoke with the kind of gravity that comes only from living through something real. Olivia felt it in her chest, a tightening, a shift. She had spent years surrounded by men who fought for dominance in rooms where the stakes were numbers on paper. But here was a man who understood responsibility in its rawest form. Life and death, trust and failure. The human cost behind quiet work no one applauded. Victor forced a laugh, swirling the amber liquid in his glass as though it might dissolve the silence. Enjoy your small talk, he muttered, turning back towards the corner booth. But Olivia didn't look away from Nathan, her voice softened. You didn't have to do that. He met her eyes, calm as ever. I didn't do it for you. And in that moment she smiled. Not out of amusement, but out of understanding. She knew. Your partner seems intense, Nathan said after Victor had rejoined his celebration. Olivia sighed, sliding onto the stool beside him. Victor is brilliant at what he does. He's also an arrogant ass who thinks a 7-figure bank account means he's better than everyone else. And yet you work with him. Partnership of necessity. She twisted her wine glass by the stem. I had the vision and the architectural expertise. He had the connections in the capital. Portland wasn't ready for a woman to lead a major development firm on her own 7 years ago. And now? A wry smile crossed her face. Now we're too successful to separate without messy consequences. But I'm working on it. Nathan nodded, understanding the complexity beneath her simple explanation. Life rarely offered clean breaks or perfect solutions. I should apologize for him, Olivia said. You're not responsible for his behavior. No, but I am responsible for the company he represents. For what it's worth, Victor doesn't speak for Harrington and Grant when he talks like that. Just half of it, Nathan observed. Olivia couldn't help but laugh. Fair point. The tension broken, they settled into conversation again, picking up where they'd left off the night before. Olivia told him about her latest project, a mixed-use development in the Pearl District designed to incorporate affordable housing alongside luxury units. Nathan shared stories about Emma's growing interest in sustainable design. An hour later, the celebration in the corner had grown louder. Victor's voice carried across the bar, boastful and commanding as he held court among his admirers. Nathan noticed Olivia glancing in that direction, her expression tightening with each look. "Big day at the office?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "We closed a major deal, the Riverview project. It's going to transform the old paper mill site into a waterfront complex. Condos, offices, retail. Sounds ambitious?" "It is, the largest project we've undertaken." She paused, studying her wineglass. Victor pushed it through faster than I would have liked. "There are concerns I wanted addressed first." Before Nathan could ask what concerns, Victor's voice rose above the bar's ambient noise. "Liv, stop hiding in the corner and come celebrate properly. Bring your mechanic, if you must. Maybe he can advise us on the parking structure." Olivia's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "Ignore him, he gets worse when he drinks." "Hard to imagine," Nathan said dryly. She smiled, grateful for his understanding. "I should go back, at least for appearance's sake. Investors are watching." Of course. He understood the obligations of professional life, even if his had been vastly different. Olivia stood, then hesitated. Would you like to join us? You shouldn't have to move because Victor's being an ass." Nathan shook his head. "I'm fine right here. You go do what you need to do." She nodded, appreciating his lack of offense. "I'll try to escape again soon." As she walked back to the celebration, Nathan couldn't help but notice how she transformed with each step. Back straightening, chin lifting, smile becoming more practiced. By the time she reached the table, she was Olivia Harrington, CEO, not the woman who had sat beside him discussing sandwich shapes and coffee preferences. He returned to his drink, content to observe from a distance. The evening continued, with occasional glances exchanged across the room whenever Victor said something particularly outrageous. Small moments of connection in the midst of separation. An hour later, the celebration had grown rowdier. Victor's voice carried even more clearly as inhibitions lowered with each round of drinks. "To the Riverview complex," he announced, raising his glass. "The most profitable venture in Harrington and Grant history. 600 luxury units, prime riverfront offices, and retail space that will lease before we even break ground." Cheers erupted from the table. Nathan noticed Olivia's smile had grown more strained, her participation more mechanical. "And to cutting through all that environmental red tape," Victor continued. "Who needs another 6 months of soil surveys when we've got the green light from the city council?" Something clicked in Nathan's mind. The Riverview site, the old paper mill. He knew that land intimately. 8 years ago, when he was still at Coleman and Fisher, he'd been part of a team conducting a feasibility study for a similar development. Their findings had halted the project entirely. Victor was still holding court, his voice carrying across the bar. "We start clearing the site next month. Groundbreaking in spring. 18 months from now, what was a decaying industrial eyesore will be Portland's premier waterfront address." Nathan set his glass down slowly. "That site has significant groundwater issues," he said, the words out before he could stop them. The bar seemed to go quiet, though in reality only those nearby had heard him. Olivia turned, her eyes finding his across the room. "What was that?" Victor called, his smile sharp-edged. "Our mechanic friend has opinions about real estate development now?" Nathan hadn't meant to speak up. This wasn't his business, wasn't his problem. But the engineer in him, the architect who understood the consequences of cutting corners, couldn't stay silent. "That area's zoned mixed use, isn't it?" he asked, his voice level. Victor's grin widened. "Sure, and so?" "So you'll have bottlenecks from both residential and commercial lanes," Nathan said. His voice wasn't raised, but the weight of his certainty cut through the chatter around them. "And the soil there? It's unstable. I used to work out of a firm that surveyed 2 blocks from that site. It flooded every spring. You're going to need at least 3 feet of soil remediation before laying a foundation. If you don't, those condos will shift within 5 years." He paused, then added softly, "Fast money, short life." A beat of silence. Victor's grin faltered. "That's exaggerated. We had engineers look at it." Olivia turned sharply toward him. "Did you check the flood data or last year's redevelopment reports?" Victor hesitated. "It wasn't relevant." Olivia pulled out her phone, fingers moving quickly. Within moments, her expression hardened. It's right here. Public Works flagged that land for mitigation last fall, and you didn't report it. The bar grew quieter, conversations slowing as eyes turned toward them. Victor shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado draining away. Nathan didn't gloat. He didn't lean back with triumph. He simply said, calm and even, "You can't build something to last if you ignore what's beneath it." Olivia's gaze lingered on him, something new settling in her chest. Respect. Victor opened his mouth to argue, but found nothing. Around him, colleagues whispered, some pulling out their phones to confirm what they had just heard. The laughter that had once drowned Nathan out had vanished. In its place was silence, thick, uneasy, undeniable. Victor set his glass down harder than he meant to and muttered, "Enjoy your opinions," before retreating to the corner booth. But the damage was done. Damn it. The celebration had shifted. The spotlight no longer rested on Victor. It rested on the quiet man in flannel who had seen what no one else bothered to look for. Olivia crossed the room to Nathan, her expression a complex mixture of concern and something else. Appreciation, perhaps. "How did you know about the soil conditions?" she asked quietly. Nathan hesitated. This was the moment to either maintain his distance or share another piece of his past. "I was on the Coleman and Fisher team that surveyed that exact site 8 years ago for the Riverside Commons project. We recommended against development without extensive soil remediation. The project was abandoned because the costs were too high." Understanding dawned in Olivia's eyes. "You were more than just an architect there, weren't you?" "I specialized in sustainable foundation design. Challenging sites were my focus." He shrugged slightly. "I know that land. The river undercuts the bank every spring. The soil is unstable from decades of industrial chemicals from the paper mill. You build there without proper remediation, you're asking for disaster." Olivia's expression had grown increasingly troubled. Victor must have known this. The environmental survey we commissioned, it barely mentioned these issues. "Who conducted the survey?" "TriStar Engineering." Nathan nodded, pieces falling into place. "They're known for producing results that developers want to see, cutting corners on testing, minimizing risks." "Damn it," Olivia muttered. "Victor insisted on using them, said they were more efficient than our usual firm." She ran a hand through her hair, a rare gesture of frustration breaking through her professional composure. "This is a nightmare. We've already sold pre-construction units. The investors are fully committed." "You have options," Nathan said quietly. "Expensive ones, but options. The site can be developed safely, but not on the timeline or budget Victor's promised." Their conversation was interrupted by a young man in a tailored suit approaching tentatively from the celebration table. "Ms. Harrington, the team is asking questions about Mr. Reed's comments. Should we be concerned?" Olivia straightened, CEO mode engaging instantly. "Tell them we're reviewing additional data. We'll address all concerns at tomorrow's meeting." After the young associate retreated, she turned back to Nathan. "I need to handle this. Can we talk more about this later?" Nathan nodded. "I still have all my notes from the original survey. They're yours if you want them." Gratitude flashed across her face. "That would be invaluable. Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I should have done more due diligence. Should have pushed harder against rushing this project." We all miss things sometimes. Not things that could risk people's homes and safety. She shook her head, disappointment in herself evident. "I built my reputation on ethical development, on doing things right." "Then fix it," Nathan said simply. "You still can." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. In that moment, they weren't CEO and mechanic, different worlds separated by circumstance. They were two professionals who recognized the weight of responsibility, the obligation to do what was right, even when it wasn't easy. "I should get back," Olivia said, though her reluctance was clear. Nathan nodded. "Good luck." As she walked away, he couldn't help but notice how the dynamics in the room had shifted. The celebration had subdued, with people huddled in smaller groups, some tapping on phones, others speaking in hushed tones. Victor sat alone at the end of the table, staring into his drink with the look of a man watching carefully laid plans unravel. Nathan finished his own drink and prepared to leave. He'd said more than he'd intended, inserted himself into business that wasn't his, yet he couldn't regret it. Some principles transcended professional boundaries. Some truths needed to be spoken, regardless of consequences. As he settled his tab, a hand touched his shoulder. He turned to find a middle-aged woman in a conservative business suit standing beside him. Her badge identified her as Harrington and Grant's chief financial officer. "Mr. Reed," she said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you. We've been concerned about rushing this project, but Victor, well, he can be persuasive. Your expertise may have just saved us from a very expensive mistake." Nathan nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just sharing what I know." "Well, what you know might have saved hundreds of people from buying homes with potentially catastrophic foundation problems." She offered her card. "If you ever decide to return to architecture, Harrington and Grant would be interested in talking." He took the card reflexively, though he had no intention of following up. "Thank you, but I'm happy where I am." She smiled knowingly. "Happy, perhaps, but fulfilled? A mind like yours doesn't stop being what it is just because you've changed careers." With that, she returned to the group, leaving Nathan with her words echoing in his thoughts. Outside, the night air carried the crisp edge of early autumn. Nathan zipped his jacket against the chill and headed for his truck. He'd gone only a few steps when he heard footsteps behind him. "Nathan, wait." He turned to find Olivia hurrying after him, her coat hastily thrown over her shoulders. "I need those survey records," she said, slightly breathless. "As soon as possible. We have an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. I'll dig them out tonight and email them to you." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Victor is furious. He's claiming you're just a mechanic with delusions of expertise, trying to sabotage our project." Nathan couldn't help but smile slightly. "That sounds about right." "It's not funny," Olivia said, though her lips twitched. "He's threatening to sue you for interfering with our business. He'd have to prove I was wrong first. The soil tests will confirm everything I said." She nodded, then shivered slightly in the cool evening air. "Why did you speak up? You could have stayed quiet. Let us make our mistake." Nathan considered the question, searching for the honest answer. "Because people would have bought those homes. Families would have saved for years for down payments, taken out 30-year mortgages, built their lives there. And within 5 years, they'd have started noticing the cracks in their foundations, the doors that wouldn't close properly, the windows that stuck. By year 10, some units would be uninhabitable. Those families would lose everything." He shrugged, as if the explanation were obvious. "I couldn't let that happen if I could prevent it." Olivia studied him, really looked at him, in a way few people ever had. "You're not what you seem, Nathan Reed. Neither are you, Olivia Harrington." Something passed between them then, a recognition, an understanding deeper than words could express. Two people who had built their lives around principles, not just profit, who understood that true value couldn't be measured in dollars or square footage, but in integrity, in doing what was right even when no one was watching. "I should go back in there," Olivia said finally. "Damage control. And I should get home to Emma." She nodded, but neither moved. The moment stretched, comfortable despite the circumstances. "Tomorrow?" Nathan asked finally. "Same place?" Olivia smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all evening. "Same place." As Nathan drove home, his mind was busy processing the evening's events. He hadn't intended to step back into the world of architecture and development, hadn't planned to reveal that part of his past. Yet somehow it felt right. Not a return to his former life, but perhaps a bridge between who he had been and who he had become. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he had already decided which box in the attic held his old Coleman and Fisher files. Tonight, after Emma was asleep, he'd dig them out. Not just for Olivia, but for himself as well. Some parts of our past are worth revisiting, not to live there again, but to reclaim pieces of ourselves we thought were lost. The following morning brought a steady drizzle, the kind of soft, persistent rain that Portland was known for. Nathan had been up late, sorting through old files, scanning documents, and sending everything to Olivia. He felt the lack of sleep as he worked beneath the hood of a Subaru Outback, tracing an elusive electrical problem that had the dashboard lights flickering intermittently. "You look like hell," Frank observed, handing him a fresh cup of coffee. Nathan accepted it gratefully. Late night. Emma okay? She's fine. Just some old work stuff that needed attention. Frank raised an eyebrow but didn't press. That was their way. Respect for each other's privacy. Focus on the job at hand. They worked in comfortable silence for the next hour. The familiar rhythm of the garage a sharp contrast to the intensity of the previous night's confrontation. Around noon, Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Emergency board meeting running long. Victor fighting hard. Your files might save this project. Thank you. He texted back a simple good luck and returned to work, pushing thoughts of Riverview and soil remediation to the back of his mind. This was his world now. Carburetors and timing belts, not cantilevers and load-bearing walls. Yet somehow the line between those worlds felt less distinct than it had just days ago. At 3 o'clock, the shop's front door chimed. Nathan was deep under the hood of a Ford F-150 with a fuel injection problem and didn't look up until Frank called his name. Nathan, you've got a visitor. He straightened, wiping his hands on a shop rag, and turned to find Olivia standing in the middle of the garage. She looked out of place in her tailored pantsuit and heels, yet somehow perfectly at ease. Her eyes took in the space, the tools arranged with precision on pegboards, the cars in various states of repair, the organized chaos of a busy mechanical shop. Sorry to drop in unannounced, she said. I was nearby and wanted to thank you in person. Nathan nodded toward his office, a small glass-walled space in the corner. Coffee? Please. They settled into the cramped space, Nathan suddenly aware of the grease under his fingernails, the contrast between her immaculate appearance and his work clothes. But Olivia seemed to notice none of it, her focus entirely on the conversation. The board voted to pause groundbreaking on Riverview, she said without preamble. Your survey files from Coleman and Fisher were damning, especially since they matched exactly with what our own engineers found when they weren't pressured to minimize the issues. Victor must have been thrilled, Nathan observed dryly. A small smile crossed her face. He accused me of corporate sabotage, claimed I'd put you up to it to undermine his leadership. When that didn't work, he insisted we could still proceed on schedule with just minor adjustments. And then I showed them your structural simulations predicting foundation failure within 5 years. The liability implications alone were enough to convince the board. We're now developing a comprehensive soil remediation plan before proceeding. Nathan nodded, relieved that reason had prevailed. It's the right call. It's also going to cost us millions in delays and additional work. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Which brings me to why I'm here. We need a consultant who understands the site, who can help us develop a remediation strategy that's both effective and efficient. Someone who's already familiar with the challenges we're facing. It took Nathan a moment to realize what she was suggesting. You want to hire me? As a specialized consultant, yes, your expertise would be invaluable, and we'd compensate you accordingly. The offer caught him completely off guard. Return to architecture, even in a limited capacity? Step back into the world he'd left behind years ago? The thought was both tempting and terrifying. I'm a mechanic now, he said finally. I haven't practiced architecture in years. Yet you immediately identified critical flaws in our development plan that our highly paid engineers either missed or minimized. Your understanding of that site and its challenges is exactly what we need. Nathan glanced around the garage at the life he'd built after leaving architecture behind. I have commitments here, to Frank, to our customers. We're not asking for full-time work, just targeted consultation on the soil remediation and foundation design. Most of it could be done evenings, weekends. We'd work around your schedule. The possibility hung in the air between them. Nathan found himself thinking not just of the professional opportunity, but of Emma, of showing her that her father was more than just a mechanic, that the knowledge and skills he'd set aside were still valuable, still part of who he was. I'd need to think about it, he said finally. Talk to Frank, make sure it wouldn't interfere with my responsibilities here. Olivia nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course, take whatever time you need. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Nathan, I think you'd be doing a lot of families a service. Your expertise could make the difference between homes that last generations and ones that start failing before the mortgage is paid off. She knew exactly which argument would resonate with him. Not money, not professional recognition, but the impact on real people, real families. The responsibility he felt to do what was right, regardless of personal benefit. After she left, Nathan stood in the garage bay, staring at the engine components spread before him without really seeing them. His mind was elsewhere, considering possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to contemplate for years. Frank appeared beside him, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Fancy lady, he observed. Don't see many Louboutins in here. Nathan smiled slightly. Frank's perception missed nothing. She's a CEO, real estate development. Uh-huh. Frank leaned against the workbench. And she came all the way to our humble shop because she wants to hire me as a consultant for a project with some foundation issues. Frank's eyebrows rose. Foundation issues? Since when do mechanics consult on foundations? Nathan hesitated, then decided Frank deserved the truth. Since they used to be architects specializing in structural design for challenging sites. To his credit, Frank barely reacted beyond a slight widening of his eyes. Huh. Explains a few things, like how you redesigned our ventilation system when the city inspector said it couldn't be done. You're not surprised? Frank chuckled. Son, I've been working with my hands for 45 years. I know the difference between someone who learned mechanics and someone who understands engineering. You've always seen deeper into how things work than most. He clapped Nathan on the shoulder. Oh, so you taking the job? I haven't decided. I have responsibilities here. To what? The shop? Frank snorted. We've been getting along fine, but I'm not so proud I can't admit having a part-time architect around might be useful, especially if some of that consulting fee finds its way into improving this place. Nathan smiled, grateful for the older man's understanding. I'll think about it. Don't think too long, Frank advised. Opportunities like this don't come around often. Besides, he added with a knowing look, that CEO seemed pretty determined, not the type to take no for an answer. As the day wound down and Nathan prepared to head home, his phone buzzed with another text from Olivia. The Cornerstone, 8 p.m. Whether your answer is yes or no, I still owe you a drink for saving our project. He smiled, typing back, I'll be there. The evening found him once again at the Cornerstone, this time with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. The bar was quieter tonight, the post-work crowd thinned out by the persistent rain that had continued all day. Nathan took his usual stool, exchanging nods with Tony. Olivia arrived precisely at 8, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. She'd changed from the business suit she'd worn earlier into more casual clothes. Dark jeans, a simple blouse, a soft cardigan. She looked different, more approachable, though no less confident. No Victor tonight? Nathan asked as she joined him. He's taken a sudden leave of absence. Personal reasons. The slight curve of her lips suggested there was more to the story. Convenient timing. Isn't it? She ordered a glass of wine, then turned to face him fully. The board has some concerns about his judgment regarding Riverview, particularly his decision to use a survey firm known for producing developer-friendly reports, and his failure to disclose the previous Coleman and Fisher findings. Sounds serious. It is. Victor has always pushed boundaries, but this crossed a line. Willfully ignoring critical safety data? That's not aggressive business. That's negligence. Nathan nodded, understanding the distinction. So what happens now? Now we rebuild the project and some damaged trust, starting with a complete reassessment of the Riverview site. She studied him over the rim of her wine glass. Have you thought about my offer? I have. Nathan turned his glass slowly between his palms. I'm interested, but I have conditions. I'm listening. I keep my job at Reed's Auto. This would be strictly consulting work, on my schedule. No commitments beyond the Riverview remediation project. Olivia nodded. Acceptable. What else? I want to remain anonymous in any public-facing materials. No press, no marketing using my name or previous credentials. This request seemed to surprise her. May I ask why? Your expertise would add credibility to the project. Nathan considered how to explain. I left that world for a reason, Olivia. I chose a different path for myself and Emma. I'm willing to consult because it's the right thing to do, but I'm not looking to reestablish myself in architecture. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. We can work with that. Anything else? Just one more thing. He met her gaze directly. I want to be involved in the community outreach. When you explain the delays and changes to people who've already bought in, I want to help make sure they understand why it's necessary. Not as an architect, just as someone who can translate the technical issues into plain language. Olivia's expression softened with something like admiration. That's not what I expected. What did you expect? Most consultants with your level of expertise would ask for higher fees, equity in the project, professional recognition. You're asking to help explain technical details to homebuyers. Nathan shrugged. Those are the people who matter most in this. They're the ones whose life savings are going into these homes. They deserve to understand exactly what they're getting and why the changes are necessary. Olivia reached out impulsively, her hand covering his on the bar. You continue to surprise me, Nathan Reed. The warmth of her touch lingered as she withdrew her hand. Something was shifting between them, boundaries blurring in ways neither had anticipated. So, we have a deal? She asked. Nathan nodded. We have a deal. They clinked glasses, sealing the agreement. What had begun as a chance encounter between strangers from different worlds had evolved into something neither could have predicted, a partnership built on shared values, mutual respect, and the recognition that sometimes the most important foundations aren't made of concrete and steel, but of integrity and trust. As their conversation continued, flowing easily from professional matters to more personal topics, Nathan found himself thinking about Emma's science project, about her building designed to work with nature rather than against it, about how children sometimes see more clearly than adults the simple truths that should guide our actions. You can't build something to last if you ignore what's beneath it. He hadn't realized he'd spoken the thought aloud until Olivia responded. That's it exactly, she said, her eyes bright with understanding. That's what I've been trying to articulate to the board. It's not just about the physical foundation, it's about the ethical foundation too. We can't build a successful project on compromised principles. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something solidified between them. A connection based not on where they came from or what they did for a living, but on who they were at their core. Two people who understood that true strength comes not from appearances or credentials, but from the invisible structures that support every action, every decision, every life. The rain continued outside, washing the city clean, revealing what had always been beneath the surface. Inside the cornerstone, two worlds that should never have intersected continued their unlikely convergence, building something new from the foundations up. 3 weeks after Nathan agreed to consult on the Riverview project, Olivia called an emergency meeting of the Harrington and Grant Board of Directors. The sleek conference room on the top floor of their downtown headquarters buzzed with tension as executives exchanged worried glances. The soil remediation assessment had come back worse than anyone anticipated, with contamination levels from the old paper mill far exceeding initial estimates. The bottom line, Olivia concluded after presenting the findings, is that we're looking at a complete redesign of the foundation systems and an additional 6 months of site preparation before we can break ground. The board members shifted uncomfortably. A silver-haired man at the end of the table spoke up. The investors aren't going to like this, Olivia. We've already pushed back the timeline once. I understand, John, but we have two choices. Do it right or don't do it at all. There's no middle ground that doesn't end in structural failure and massive liability. What about Victor's original engineering team? They didn't flag these issues. Olivia's expression hardened slightly. They missed it or were instructed to minimize it. Either way, their assessment was dangerously inadequate. The tension in the room was palpable as board members processed the implications. Millions in additional costs, delayed returns, unhappy investors. What's your recommendation? Asked Margaret Chen, the CFO who had handed Nathan her card that night at the Cornerstone. Olivia took a deep breath. I believe we have an opportunity here, not just to salvage Riverview, but to transform how Harrington and Grant approaches development entirely. She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, revealing a simple title, Foundations. I'm proposing a new initiative, one that integrates theoretical architectural expertise with practical knowledge from people who work directly with the land and buildings. For too long, we've relied exclusively on credentialed experts who sometimes miss what's right in front of them because they are looking through the lens of textbooks rather than experience. The room grew quiet as she continued. The Riverview soil issues were immediately apparent to someone who had actually worked that land, who understood the riverbank's seasonal patterns, who recognized the legacy of industrial contamination because he'd seen it firsthand. We need to start incorporating that kind of knowledge into our development process from day one. You're talking about your mechanic, John said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. I'm talking about Nathan Reed, who happens to have both an MIT master's degree in architecture and years of hands-on experience with Portland's infrastructure, Olivia corrected firmly. And yes, he's part of this proposal, but the initiative is much broader. I want to create teams that bring together our architects and engineers with construction workers, maintenance personnel, local residents, people whose daily lives give them insights our computer models might miss. Margaret nodded slowly, intrigued. This is actually quite innovative, Olivia. But how would it work practically? We start with Riverview as a pilot project. Our design team works in tandem with local experts, including former employees of the paper mill who understand the site's history, engineers who've worked on the riverbank infrastructure, and yes, Nathan Reed, who brings both architectural expertise and practical knowledge. For the next hour, Olivia detailed her vision. By the time she finished, most of the board seemed cautiously supportive, seeing the potential both for better development practices and a powerful marketing angle. Harrington and Grant as pioneers in community-integrated design. I like the concept, John conceded, but I'm still concerned about bringing in a consultant whose primary job is fixing cars. No offense to Mr. Reed's credentials, but if he was so brilliant, why did he leave architecture for auto repair? Olivia met his gaze steadily. Personal reasons that don't diminish his expertise. And he's not interested in returning to architecture full-time. This would be a specialized consulting role only. I've met him, Margaret added unexpectedly. I found his analysis of the Riverview issues to be remarkably precise. Sometimes stepping away from a field gives you perspective you can't get from inside it. The meeting concluded with tentative approval for the Foundation's initiative, contingent on Nathan's formal agreement to serve as lead consultant. As the board members filed out, Margaret lingered. It's a good idea, Olivia, innovative and practical, but are you sure Reed will agree? From what I gathered, he seems quite content with his current life. Olivia gathered her materials, a hint of uncertainty crossing her usually confident expression. That's the part I'm not sure about. He's already consulting on the remediation, but this would be much more visible, more demanding, and more of a commitment to you personally, Margaret observed with the insight of someone who had known Olivia for years. Olivia glanced up sharply. This is strictly professional. Margaret's knowing smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Of course, just like your regular meetings at that dive bar are strictly professional. The cornerstone isn't a bam, Olivia protested. It's just authentic. Well, good luck with your authentic mechanic architect. I hope he says yes for the project's sake, of course. That evening, Olivia arrived at the cornerstone earlier than usual, nervous energy propelling her through her normal routine. She texted Nathan earlier, asking if they could meet to discuss an expansion of his role on Riverview. His simple, sure, see you at 8 gave no indication of how he might respond to her proposal. The bar was quiet for a Thursday, just a few regulars scattered among the tables. Tony nodded in recognition as she took her usual seat, setting a glass of her preferred Pinot Noir before her without being asked. It struck her suddenly how this place, so far removed from her normal world of high-rise meetings and designer cocktails, had become a kind of anchor in her life over the past month. At precisely 8, the door swung open and Nathan walked in. Even after weeks of knowing him, Olivia was still struck by his presence. Not flashy or commanding like Victor's, but steady, grounded, the kind of quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. His flannel shirt was dark blue tonight, his expression thoughtful as he spotted her and made his way over. "You look serious," he said as he settled onto the stool beside her. "Bad news from the additional testing?" "Not bad, just complicated." She took a breath, deciding to dive straight in. "I presented a new initiative to the board today, called it Foundations. It would formalize and expand what we've been doing with Riverview, integrating practical, on-the-ground knowledge with traditional architectural expertise. Nathan listened as she outlined the concept, his expression neutral but attentive. When she finished, he took a slow sip of his drink before responding. It's a good idea, long overdue in the industry, actually. I want you to lead it, Olivia said, watching his reaction carefully. As chief consultant, not just for Riverview, but as a formal program within Harrington and Grant. She saw the immediate hesitation in his eyes, the slight tension in his shoulders. That sounds like a much bigger commitment than we discussed. It would be, she acknowledged. More hours, more visibility, but also more impact. The chance to fundamentally change how we approach development in Portland. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing condensation on his glass. I appreciate the offer, Olivia, but I can't accept. Though she'd anticipated resistance, the flat refusal still caught her off guard. May I ask why? Several reasons. First, I have commitments to Frank and Reed's Auto. I can't suddenly start spending half my time on architecture again. He paused, then added more quietly, and Emma needs stability, a schedule she can count on, a father who's present, not constantly rushing between two different careers. Olivia nodded, remembering what he'd told her about Sarah's departure, about the promises he'd made to himself regarding Emma's upbringing. I understand those concerns. We could work around your schedule at the garage, make the hours flexible. It's more than just logistics, Nathan said, meeting her eyes directly. I left that world for a reason, Olivia. The corporate politics, the compromise of vision for profit, the endless meetings that take time away from actual creation. I found something simpler, more straightforward at Reed's Auto. I'm not eager to trade that peace for boardroom battles. There was truth in his words that Olivia couldn't deny. She thought of her own exhaustion after days of navigating corporate politics, of Victor's constant undermining of her authority, of investors whose primary concern was quarterly returns rather than lasting quality. What if it could be different, she asked. What if foundations could operate outside the normal corporate structure? You'd report directly to me with freedom to build your own approach. Nathan smiled slightly. You're persistent, I'll give you that. It's how I built a company in an industry that didn't want women at the table. She leaned forward, her passion for the project evident. Look, I understand your reluctance, but this isn't just another corporate initiative. It's a chance to fundamentally change how buildings are designed and built in this city, to ensure that what happened with Riverview doesn't happen again. By using me as the poster boy for practical knowledge, there was no bitterness in his tone, just a clear-eyed assessment. By using your unique combination of formal education and hands-on experience, she corrected. You bridge worlds that rarely connect, Nathan. How many MIT-trained architects know what it feels like to work beneath a car all day? How many mechanics can read structural plans and identify load-bearing issues at a glance? He didn't answer immediately, and she could see him weighing her words, considering possibilities he'd previously dismissed. Think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. Talk to Emma, talk to Frank. If it's still a no, I'll respect that, and we'll continue with the current arrangement. Nathan nodded, then changed the subject to the latest soil testing results. The conversation shifted to technical matters, but Olivia could see that her proposal had planted a seed. Whether it would grow remained to be seen. Later that night, Nathan sat at his kitchen table, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old Craftsman settling. Emma had gone to bed an hour ago, but not before giving him plenty to think about. He'd mentioned Olivia's offer during dinner, expecting his daughter to react with concern about changes to their routine. Instead, she'd straightened in her chair, eyes bright with excitement. You should do it, Dad, she'd said immediately. It's perfect for you. It would mean some late nights, squirt? Less time at home. Emma had rolled her eyes in that distinctly preteen way. I'm not a baby. Mrs. Henderson loves hanging out here. Besides, she'd added with unexpected insight, you're always telling me to challenge myself. Isn't this your challenge? Now staring at the scattered papers before him, soil analysis reports, foundation redesign concepts, notes from his consulting work on Riverview, Nathan confronted the real reason for his hesitation. It wasn't just about time or logistics or even Emma. It was fear, not fear of failure. He knew his capabilities, trusted his expertise, No, this was a more complex fear. Fear of returning to a world he'd left behind, of opening doors he'd deliberately closed, of disrupting the careful balance he'd built over the past 8 years. And beneath that, perhaps the most difficult to acknowledge, fear of what might develop between him and Olivia if they worked more closely together. The connection between them had grown steadily over the past month, evolving from professional respect to genuine friendship, and now hovering at the edge of something more. Something neither had named but both felt. Nathan sighed, gathering the papers into a neat stack. Tomorrow he would talk to Frank, get his perspective. The older man had become something of a mentor over the years, offering the kind of straightforward wisdom that came from a lifetime of hard work and hard choices. For now, he needed sleep. Decisions this important shouldn't be made on caffeine and restlessness. The next morning at Reed's Auto, Nathan outlined Olivia's proposal to Frank as they worked side by side on a transmission rebuild. The older mechanic listened without interrupting, his weathered hands never pausing in their precise movements. "So," Frank said when Nathan finished, "big shot architecture firm wants you back, but only part-time, and you get to call the shots." "That's oversimplifying it a bit." "Not by much." Frank tightened a bolt with practiced efficiency. "Sounds like a sweet deal to me." "I have responsibilities here." Frank snorted. "To what? The carburetor gods? This shop isn't going anywhere, Nathan. We managed before you showed up. We'll manage if you split your time." "It's not just about the shop." Nathan hesitated, then added, "There's Emma to consider." At this, Frank straightened, fixing Nathan with a penetrating look. "Let me ask you something. That girl of yours, what do you want for her?" "What every parent wants: happiness, security, opportunities." "And how do you think she sees you? As just a mechanic? Or as the man who gave up a fancy career to raise her right?" Nathan hadn't considered this perspective. "I don't know." "I do." Frank wiped his hands on a shop rag. "She sees a father who put her first, who rebuilt his entire life around her needs. That kind of love creates security no amount of routine can match." He paused, then added more gently, "But kids also need to see their parents grow, Nathan, to pursue their own dreams, to use their gifts. What message are you sending if you turn down an opportunity that clearly excites you?" The question hit home with unexpected force. Nathan had always justified his career change as necessary for Emma's stability. But what if, as she grew older, that same choice began to look like settling, like abandoning potential rather than redirecting it? "Besides," Frank continued with a sly grin, "I'm not blind. This CEO lady, Olivia, she's more than just a client, isn't she?" Nathan felt a flush creep up his neck. "It's complicated." "Life usually is." Frank turned back to the transmission. "Just don't make it more complicated by letting fear make your decisions." The words echoed those Emma had spoken the night before. When had his daughter and his boss become so insightful about his inner life? By closing time, Nathan had reached a decision. He texted Olivia, "About foundations, let's talk. Same place, 8 p.m. Her reply came almost immediately. "I'll be there." That evening at the Cornerstone, Nathan arrived early, wanting a moment to gather his thoughts. The familiar atmosphere of the bar calmed his nerves as he settled into his usual seat. This place had become significant to him over the past month, a neutral ground where he and Olivia had built something unexpected between the worlds they each inhabited. When she walked in, her face brightened at the sight of him, and something shifted in his chest. This wasn't just about a job offer anymore. It was about possibilities neither of them had anticipated when they first spoke in this very spot. "Hi," she said, sliding onto the stool beside him. "Hi, yourself." He smiled, the tension he'd carried all day easing somewhat in her presence. They ordered their usual drinks, then Olivia turned to face him fully. "So, you wanted to talk about foundations?" Nathan nodded. "I've been thinking about your offer, talked it over with Emma and Frank. And? And I'll do it, with conditions." He held up a hand as her expression brightened. "First, I keep my job at Reed's Auto. 3 days a week there, 2 at Harrington and Grant, with flexibility for site visits as needed." Olivia nodded. "That works? What else?" I want real authority over the foundation's teams, not just as a figurehead, but with actual decision-making power regarding site assessments and foundation designs. Absolutely, that's the whole point. And finally, Nathan said, meeting her eyes directly, I want complete transparency. No hidden agendas, no corporate games. If investors or board members try to cut corners on safety or quality for the sake of profit, I walk away. No questions, no negotiations. Olivia didn't hesitate. You have my word. They shook hands formally. The moment waited with significance. This wasn't just a business arrangement. It was a partnership based on shared values and mutual respect. Rare in their industry, rarer still between people from such different worlds. So, Olivia said, a smile breaking through her professional demeanor, should we drink to foundations? They clinked glasses, the simple gesture sealing more than just a business agreement. As they settled into conversation about next steps, Nathan felt a certainty he hadn't experienced in years. Not just about the project, but about the path forward, one that integrated the parts of himself he'd kept separate for too long. Later, as they left the bar, Olivia paused in the parking lot. Thank you for taking this chance, Nathan. I know it wasn't an easy decision. The right ones rarely are, he replied. They stood for a moment in the cool evening air, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then with a simple good night, they parted ways, each knowing that tomorrow would mark the beginning of something neither could fully predict. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of changes as the Foundation's initiative took shape. Nathan's first official day at Harrington and Grant felt surreal, walking into the gleaming downtown high-rise not as a consultant, but as the newly appointed Director of Foundation Systems, a title Olivia had created specifically for him. Margaret Chen greeted him in the lobby, her professional demeanor warming as she shook his hand. Welcome aboard, Mr. Reed, or should I say, welcome back to architecture. Nathan is fine, he said, still uncomfortable with the formality. And it's not exactly a return, more of a bridge between worlds. A perfect description of what Olivia hopes to achieve with Foundations. She led him to the elevator. The team is eager to meet you, some skeptical, others excited, all curious about the mechanic with an MIT degree who's going to revolutionize how we build in Portland. Nathan grimaced slightly. I'd prefer less dramatic framing. Margaret laughed. Too late. Olivia's enthusiasm is contagious. She's been championing this program, and you, to everyone who'll listen. The elevator doors opened directly into a large, open workspace on the 15th floor. Unlike the sterile corporate environment Nathan had expected, this space buzzed with energy. Drafting tables mingled with digital workstations. Material samples and soil core displays lined one wall. Large windows offered sweeping views of the Willamette River and the very site they would be transforming. Olivia stood in the center of it all, deep in conversation with a diverse group, young architects in fashionable glasses, older men in construction gear, women in business casual attire. She looked up as Nathan approached, her professional smile warming into something more personal. Everyone, this is Nathan Reed, our new Director of Foundation Systems and the inspiration behind the entire Foundation's initiative. Nathan endured the round of introductions, shaking hands with architects, engineers, geologists, and construction specialists. The team Olivia had assembled represented exactly what she described, a blend of theoretical expertise and practical experience, academic credentials, and hands-on knowledge. And finally, Olivia said, leading him to a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who stood somewhat apart from the others, I believe you've met Victor Grant. Nathan kept his expression neutral as he extended his hand. Mr. Grant. Victor's handshake was firm, his smile tight, but not overtly hostile. Reed, quite a career change, from mechanic to director in one step. Victor has rejoined us after his leave of absence, Olivia explained smoothly. He'll be handling investor relations while we restructure the Riverview project. The subtext was clear. Victor had been sidelined from direct project management, his role now limited to keeping investors calm while the real work happened elsewhere. A demotion wrapped in a face-saving title. I look forward to working together, Nathan said, meaning none of it. Victor's smile never reached his eyes. Indeed, though I expect our interactions will be minimal. I'll be focused on the financial aspects, while you dig in the dirt. With that parting shot, he excused himself to take a call, leaving Nathan and Olivia alone for a moment. Sorry about that, she said quietly. The board insisted on keeping him involved. Too many connections with key investors to cut him loose entirely. It's fine, Nathan assured her. I've dealt with worse than corporate politics. The morning proceeded with briefings and introductions, culminating in Nathan's first official act as director, a site visit to Riverview scheduled for that afternoon. As the team prepared to depart, Olivia pulled him aside. How does it feel, being back in this world? Nathan considered the question. Strange, he admitted, but not in a bad way, like putting on an old jacket and finding it still fits, just differently than you remembered. She smiled at the analogy. Well, it looks good on you. The team's impressed already, especially when they realize you know as much about practical construction as you do about theoretical design. We'll see if they still feel that way after I drag them through mud at the riverbank. True to his word, that afternoon, Nathan led the Foundation's team through a comprehensive exploration of the Riverview site, not from the comfort of the observation platform where developers usually stood, but down into the trenches where soil samples were being extracted, along the eroding riverbank where seasonal water patterns told their own story, into the half-demolished structures of the old paper mill where a century of industrial chemicals had seeped into the ground. The younger architects in their clean boots and designer jackets looked horrified at first, but Nathan's approach was transformative. He didn't lecture or condescend. Instead, he asked questions, encouraged observations, created a collaborative atmosphere where everyone's perspective was valued. What do you see here? He asked a young woman with a fresh graduate degree, pointing to a pattern in the soil stratification. She hesitated, clearly afraid of giving a wrong answer. Different soil densities. Good. And what might cause that? Flooding events, she ventured. Exactly. Nathan nodded encouragingly. This pattern shows periodic inundation, spring floods that deposited different sediment layers. Now, how would that affect foundation design? As she thought through the implications, Nathan turned to one of the construction foremen. Mike, you've worked riverfront projects before. What problems have you encountered with soil like this? The older man stepped forward, initially cautious but warming to the topic as Nathan showed genuine interest in his experience. Differential settlements, the killer. One section compacts more than another, and suddenly you've got cracks running through your foundation slab. Solutions? Nathan prompted. For the next hour, architects and construction workers, geologists and engineers engaged in problem-solving together. Not as hierarchical specialists, but as equals bringing different perspectives to a shared challenge. Nathan moved among them, sometimes guiding, sometimes questioning, creating bridges between technical jargon and practical knowledge. From a small rise overlooking the site, Olivia watched the transformation happening before her eyes. This was exactly what she'd envisioned for foundations, breaking down the silos that so often led to costly mistakes and dangerous oversights. And Nathan was the perfect catalyst, comfortable in both worlds, respected by both groups. As the afternoon wound down and the team headed back to their vehicles, muddied but energized, a black SUV pulled up to the site entrance. Victor stepped out, immaculate in his tailored suit, surveying the bedraggled group with barely concealed disdain. Productive field trip? He asked Olivia as she approached. Extremely. The team has already identified several approaches to the remediation that could save us millions while improving safety. Victor glanced toward Nathan, who was deep in conversation with the geology team. The board is concerned about timeline. These explorations are all very enlightening, I'm sure, but investors want to see concrete progress. They'll get it, Olivia assured him, but done right, not just done fast. Just remember, Olivia, we're a development company, not a research institution. Victor's tone was mild, but the warning was clear. Your pet project has a limited runway to prove its value. As he drove away, Olivia felt a familiar tension headache building. Victor might have been sidelined, but he wasn't powerless. If foundations didn't demonstrate clear value, and soon, he'd use the delay to undermine her position with the board. She was still pondering this challenge when Nathan joined her. Successful day, he said, oblivious to the exchange with Victor. This team has potential. They just needed permission to think differently. Olivia smiled, pushing aside her concerns. You gave them that. I've never seen architects and construction workers collaborate so effectively. It's not about credentials, Nathan said, watching the team load equipment into vans. It's about respect. Everyone has knowledge worth sharing if you bother to listen. The simple truth of his statement struck Olivia deeply. In her climb to the top of a male-dominated industry, she'd sometimes adopted the very behavior she despised, asserting authority through credentials, emphasizing theory over practical knowledge, creating hierarchies that stifled true innovation. Excellence isn't measured by the degrees on your wall, Nathan continued, echoing her thoughts. It's how you apply that knowledge in the real world that matters. As they walked back to their vehicles, Olivia felt a renewed certainty about the path they were forging together. Victor's threats and the board's impatience were real challenges, but the potential of what they were building, both at Riverview and within Harrington and Grant, was worth the fight. Over the following weeks, the Foundation's initiative gained momentum. Nathan's unique approach, combining rigorous technical analysis with practical field experience, proved remarkably effective. The team developed an innovative remediation strategy for Riverview that would not only address the contamination issues, but actually incorporate them into the design, using natural bioremediation systems that would continue cleaning the soil long after construction was complete. The breakthrough came when Nathan brought Emma's science project concept to a team meeting. Her idea of buildings that worked with natural systems rather than against them. The professional architects had initially smiled indulgently at the child's design, but Nathan challenged them to take it seriously. What if we stopped seeing the contamination as an obstacle and started seeing it as an opportunity, he asked. What if the foundation system itself became part of the ongoing remediation process? From that seed grew an entirely new approach, a living foundation system that would not only support the buildings, but actively improve the soil beneath them over time. When the team presented the concept to the board, even the most skeptical members were impressed by the innovation. This isn't just solving a problem, Margaret observed. It's turning the problem into an asset. The marketing potential alone is enormous. Victor, however, remained unconvinced. It's untested, experimental. Investors don't like experiments with their money. Actually, Nathan countered, pulling up slides on his tablet, the core technologies have been proven in multiple applications across Europe and Asia. What's new is combining them into an integrated system specifically designed for this site. The presentation continued, with Nathan fielding technical questions with the ease of someone who'd never left architecture. His confidence was neither aggressive nor defensive, just the natural certainty of someone who thoroughly understood his subject. By the meeting's end, the board had approved the new approach. As executives filed out, congratulating Nathan and the team, Victor lingered. Impressive performance, he said, his tone making the compliment sound like an accusation. You've clearly won over the board. For now. Nathan met his gaze evenly. This isn't a competition, Victor. It's about building something that will last, something all of us can be proud of. How inspirational. Victor's smile was cold. Just remember, the real world runs on profit, not pride. The moment your innovative approach threatens the bottom line, all this goodwill will evaporate. After he left, Olivia joined Nathan, having overheard the exchange. Don't let him get to you. He's threatened by your success. It's not me he's threatened by, Nathan observed. It's the change you're creating in the company. He built his career on the old way of doing things, pushing projects through as quickly and cheaply as possible, maximizing short-term profit over long-term quality. Olivia nodded, recognizing the truth in his assessment. For years, I convinced myself that was just how business worked, that compromises were inevitable. She looked at him with newfound certainty. You've reminded me there's another way. As spring turned to summer, the Riverview project entered its most critical phase. The innovative foundation system moved from concept to implementation, with Nathan dividing his time between the site and Reed's Auto, just as he'd insisted. 3 days a week, he still worked as a mechanic, hands deep in engines and transmissions. The other 2, he directed a revolutionary approach to urban development. What surprised him most was how naturally the two worlds began to merge. He found himself applying mechanical principles to foundation problems and architectural concepts to complex engine issues. Rather than feeling divided between identities, he felt more integrated than he had in years. Emma thrived amid the changes. Rather than resenting the shifts in routine, she embraced them enthusiastically. Nathan often picked her up from school and brought her to the Riverview site, where she watched the living foundation take shape. Her simple science project concept transformed into an actual construction project. One warm afternoon, as Nathan supervised the installation of a key component of the bioremediation system, he looked up to see Emma perched on the tailgate of his pickup, watching the proceedings with rapt attention. Beside her sat Olivia, the two deep in conversation, heads bent together over what appeared to be Emma's sketchbook. The sight struck him with unexpected force. These two parts of his life, no longer separate but beautifully integrated. Emma had taken to Olivia immediately, recognizing in her the same determination and intelligence she admired in her father. And Olivia, to Nathan's surprise, seemed equally taken with Emma, treating her not as a child to be humored, but as a young mind worthy of serious engagement. As he approached, he caught snippets of their conversation. "So if the water flows through these channels," Emma was saying, pencil moving rapidly across the page, "it would naturally filter through the plant roots before returning to the river." "Exactly," Olivia nodded, pointing to a detail in the drawing. "And if you curved this section to follow the natural topography, you'd need less energy to move the water." Nathan leaned against the truck, watching them work. "Should I be worried you two are redesigning my entire project?" Emma looked up, grinning. "Dad, we're making it better. Olivia says my idea for the water gardens could actually work with the foundation system." "Does she now?" Nathan raised an eyebrow at Olivia, who shrugged unapologetically. "She has good instincts. The integration of water features with the bioremediation channels is elegant, simple but effective." Emma beamed at the praise. "Can we show the team, please?" Before Nathan could answer, his phone rang. An urgent call from the geology team. They discovered something unexpected during the excavation for the main foundation piers. Something that could threaten the entire project. "I need to handle this," he told Olivia and Emma. "You two keep working on your improvements. I'll be back." The discovery was worse than he'd feared. Beneath the expected contamination layer, the excavation had revealed an old industrial waste pit, a dumping ground for chemical byproducts from the paper mill's early days, long before environmental regulations existed. The toxic sludge was contained for now, but disturbing it further could release contaminants directly into the river. By the time Nathan returned to where Olivia and Emma waited, his expression told the story. "How bad?" Olivia asked quietly. "Bad enough to halt construction? Possibly bad enough to kill the project entirely." He glanced at Emma, not wanting to worry her. "We need to discuss options with the environmental team." Emma, perceptive as always, recognized the gravity of the situation. "Is it the toxic stuff from the old factory? My science teacher said those old paper mills used really bad chemicals before the laws changed." Nathan nodded, once again impressed by his daughter's awareness. "Yes, and it's worse than we anticipated. The original surveys missed an entire disposal pit." Olivia's face had gone pale. "The liability implications alone. This could bankrupt us if it leaked into the river." They stood in silence, the weight of the discovery settling over them. Months of work, millions invested, and now this, a toxic legacy from a century past threatening to derail everything they'd built. Emma, however, was flipping through her sketchbook with increasing excitement. "Dad, what if this is actually good news?" Nathan and Olivia exchanged puzzled glances. "How exactly is a toxic waste pit good news, Squirt?" "Because," Emma said, holding up a drawing, "what if instead of trying to remove all the bad stuff, which would be super expensive and dangerous, you built a whole project around containing and cleaning it? Like make dealing with the pollution the main feature, instead of trying to hide it?" Nathan took the sketchbook, studying his daughter's concept with growing interest. It was rudimentary, childlike in its execution, but the core idea was revolutionary, a development designed not despite environmental damage, but because of it. A showcase for remediation and regeneration rather than a cover-up of industrial legacy. "This," he began, then looked at Olivia, who was already seeing the possibilities. "This could work," she finished, "not just as a solution for Riverview, but as a completely new approach to brownfield development everywhere. In that moment, looking at his daughter's simple drawing and Olivia's excited expression, Nathan felt a certainty that transcended the technical challenges ahead. This crisis wasn't an ending, but a beginning. A chance to build something truly innovative, truly meaningful. The real strength, he said softly, isn't in building the biggest structures, but in building the most enduring ones. Emma nodded solemnly. Like you always say, Dad, you can't ignore what's underneath if you want something to last. Olivia reached out, her hand finding Nathan's, fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt as natural as it was significant. Then let's build something that lasts. 3 months later, the Cornerstone Bar and Grill hosted an unusual gathering. The regular patrons watched with curiosity as the tables filled with an eclectic mix. Architects in casual clothes, construction workers still dusty from the day's labor, corporate executives looking slightly out of place without their usual power suits. At the center of it all sat Nathan, Emma, and Olivia, surrounded by the Foundation's team. They were celebrating the official approval of the revised Riverview project, now renamed Renewal, which had just received unanimous support from both the Harrington and Grant Board and the City Planning Commission. The project had been transformed from a standard luxury development into a pioneering example of regenerative architecture, a complex that would actively heal the industrial damage of the past while creating homes and workspaces for the future. The Living Foundation system had evolved into a comprehensive approach that incorporated Emma's water garden concept, creating a development that would actually improve the health of the adjacent river rather than merely avoiding harm. Victor was notably absent from the celebration. He'd resigned 2 weeks earlier after failing to convince the board to abandon the innovative approach in favor of his original, faster, cheaper plan. His parting shot, "You can't build a profitable business on idealism," had fallen flat as preliminary sales data showed unprecedented demand for the environmentally regenerative units. Tony, the bartender who had witnessed the entire unlikely story unfold from behind his counter, raised a glass. "To Foundations, whatever the hell that is." Laughter rippled through the group as glasses clinked. Nathan found himself surrounded by people from all the worlds he'd inhabited. Frank from the garage, colleagues from his Coleman and Fisher days, the diverse team from Foundations, and at the center, Emma and Olivia, the two who had helped him rebuild not just a project but himself. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Nathan and Olivia stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The summer evening was perfect, the kind that made Portland's rainy winters worthwhile. "So," Olivia said, leaning against the wall beside him, "when I dragged you into consulting on Riverview, did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" Nathan smiled, shaking his head. "Not even close. I thought it would be a one-time thing, fix the foundation issues, then back to my normal life. And now is this?" She gestured toward the bar where their two worlds had completely merged. "The new normal?" He considered the question seriously. "I don't know if anything about this is normal, but it feels right. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm living half a life. Architect or mechanic, professional or father. It's all just me." Olivia nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Integration rather than compartmentalization. "Exactly, like good architecture, all the parts working together instead of fighting each other." She turned to face him fully, the professional mask completely gone, leaving just the woman he'd come to know over these extraordinary months. "And us? Where do we fit in this integrated life of yours?" Nathan reached for her hand, the gesture no longer tentative or uncertain. "At the Foundation," he said simply, "where everything begins." Inside the Cornerstone, Emma watched through the window as her father and Olivia talked, their silhouettes close in the gathering twilight. She smiled, turning back to her conversation with Margaret Chen about college programs in sustainable architecture. At 10 years old, she already had clearer plans for her future than most adults. Around her, the unlikely family they'd built continued to grow. Professionals and tradespeople, executives and mechanics, all brought together by a shared vision of building something that would outlast them all. Not just structures of concrete and steel, but connections between people, between ideas, between worlds that too often remain separate. In the months and years to come, The Foundation's initiative would transform not just Riverview, but development projects across Portland and beyond. Nathan would continue dividing his time between Reed's Auto and Harrington and Grant, refusing to choose between worlds when integration offered so much more. Emma would grow up surrounded by mentors from both realms, her natural talents nurtured by people who valued both theoretical knowledge and practical skills. And at the cornerstone where it all began, the man in the flannel shirt would still take his usual seat at the end of the bar. But he would no longer sit alone, no longer be the target of mockery. Instead, he would be surrounded by people who saw him clearly. The mechanic, the architect, the father, the man who had built something extraordinary from the foundations up. Because real strength isn't found in titles or appearances. It's built day by day, choice by choice, in the quiet integrity of a life lived with purpose, in the courage to break down walls between worlds, in the wisdom to know that the most important structures aren't the ones that reach toward the sky, but the ones that connect us to each other, to the earth beneath our feet, and to the future we build together.